Jai Hind, Namaste, hello and a very warm welcome to UPSC for everyone. My name is Abhinav and in this video we'll be discussing selected topics from the Hindu and Indian Express for the date 28th of September 2020. Now in this video we'll be discussing the following topics. Armenia-Azerbaijan clashes. So I will tell you what these clashes are all about. Basically it is about a region called Nagorno-Karabakh which lies inside Azerbaijan but is controlled by the Armenian army, and these clashes are about the heavy concoction of religious and ethnic clashes. So we will see what all these clashes are all about and what is at stake. This also relates to energy security in Europe, and this could lead to a big problem or a big issue in Europe, more so because we are living in 2020 and anything can happen. So let's hope that this does not escalate. And yes, there is also a Pakistan angle in it. I will tell you when we discuss. Sandalwood spike disease. So this disease is basically ailing or harming the sandalwood forests, especially in Karnataka and Kerala. So we'll see what this disease is all about. We'll also see why is it called an invisible killer. Then India far from herd immunity. This was the statement made by our health minister, Dr. Harshvardhan, and he basically was commenting upon the findings of the first Sero survey which was conducted for May, and which found out that only 0.73% of people in India during May had antibodies. Now the result of second Sero survey are also going to be out, but based on what he has seen, he's saying that results are not that encouraging. So we are far away from herd immunity. So basically we should follow all the norms of social distancing, avoiding crowds and maintaining our hygiene till the time there is no herd immunity or medicine. So I will tell you what is herd immunity and I will also tell you what are Sero surveys. Then GIMEX 20, basically this is a biennial naval exercise between India and Japan. So we'll see where this is happening this year, in what format this is happening, and what is the significance of increasing maritime cooperation between India and Japan. And then we'll finally cover forest fires, very important topic. I will be telling a lot of things in this topic. First, I will tell you what are forest fires. Then I will tell you the types of forest fires. Then I will tell you how climate change has excavated or accelerated this problem of forest fires. There is a system called forest fire weather or fire weather phenomena which has been accelerated both in its occurrence and severity because of climate change. So I will also tell you what is fire weather, what are the conditions that lead to forest fires. Then I will tell you what are different types of forest fires, and I will also tell you the whole mechanism in India to tackle the problem of forest fires. I will tell you the classifications that we have done in India to basically identify forest fires and the policy structures that we have in place to tackle forest fires. So this is going to be a very important, especially for your mains examination, GS paper 3, for those who are preparing for civil services. So please pay attention to this topic. So these are all the topics that we'll be discussing. Now let's get started. Armenia-Azerbaijan clashes. Now this is an old conflict which has again erupted quite recently, and now this is basically endangering the regional security and also the energy security for European nations, right? So we will see this whole Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict. This is basically over a region called Nagorno-Karabakh. So we'll see what is Nagorno-Karabakh, right? What is at stakes, which players are involved, and what are their reactions. So let us start. Now basically there is a region called Nagorno-Karabakh. Now Azerbaijan, basically it is a country of Muslim Turks, and Armenia is a country of Armenian Christians, right? Now during the Soviet Union, both of them were part of the erstwhile Soviet Union or the USSR. Now USSR gave no place to religion and whatnot, so there were not many clashes during USSR period because they were all subdued under the strong iron fist of the Soviet Union. Now during that era, this region, Nagorno-Karabakh, though it comes under the territorial extent of Azerbaijan region, but it was identified as an autonomous region from 1923 to 1991. That is the fall of Soviet Union that happened in 1991. Now when that happened, again for a brief period, Azerbaijan took control, then there were clashes, and then a peace-fire was announced in 1994, and from then this has been the status quo, that this Nagorno-Karabakh region has been under the control of Armenian military, and Armenian military has also occupied the region around this Nagorno-Karabakh region, right? Now in this region, basically both the Armenian Christians and the Azerbaijani Muslim Turks live, but the majority is Armenian Christians. So this conflict is basically a mixture of religious and ethnic identities, right? Now this has flared up again, it keeps on flaring up. And a very funny part is that even Pakistan is claiming that we will help Azerbaijan. Now they are not an army, they are a mercenary army. So basically they'll be sending their jihadis in all probability to the Azerbaijan region. And Turkey has a pact or a security alliance with Azerbaijan, and Russia has a security alliance with Armenia. So now Turkey and Russia will also come into picture. Both of them are also already against each other, Russia and Turkey, because Turkey basically it shot down a military plane of Russia, right? And Russia also did things to upset Turkey. So they have been basically not so good terms between the two, and now this problem could increase the troubles. Now the Pope has also called for peace, and international community is calling for peace. Iran is saying that we will help in mediation. France is saying that we will help in mediation. Everybody is jumping. India supports Armenia. Pakistan supports Azerbaijan. So this is a very complex issue. So let us see. See, this is the, like I said, former Nagorno-Karabakh autonomous region from 1923 to 21. Nagorno-Karabakh Republic, a de facto government internationally recognized as Azerbaijani territory internationally, because these are the borders of Azerbaijan, but Armenia is controlling this region, but held by Armenian military since the 1994 ceasefire. Another thing, geography question, Azerbaijan capital Baku and Armenian capital Yerevan, right? A clearer picture of the map. This is Azerbaijan. This is basically Azerbaijani territory, but this Nagorno-Karabakh and surrounding region is controlled by Armenians, right? Because they are providing security to Nagorno-Karabakh. Again, Nagorno-Karabakh is home to both Armenian Christians and Azerbaijani Muslim Turks, but majority is the Armenian Christians, right? Now let us see what the article is saying. Clashes have erupted between Armenia and Azerbaijan over the volatile Nagorno-Karabakh region, reigniting concern about instability in the South Caucasus. So I will also tell you what is Caucasus, right? Now what is Nagorno-Karabakh? It is a mountainous region of about 4400 square kilometers, a breakaway region that is inside Azerbaijan but is run by ethnic Armenians, traditionally inhabited by Christian Armenians and Muslim Turks. In Soviet times, it became an autonomous region within the Republic of Azerbaijan, because Soviet Union was basically a collection of 11 republics. Right? So there was a Republic of Azerbaijan, there was a Republic of Armenia, there was a Republic of Russia, and all the republics together they formed USSR, or the Soviet Republic. Internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan, but majority of population is ethnic Armenian, which are Christians. So that is why they don't want to stay within Azerbaijan, because Azerbaijan government is run by the Muslim Turks. Nagorno-Karabakh region has about 95% of population as ethnically Armenian and is controlled by them, but it is internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan. Now what could be the implications? Two pipelines carry oil and gas from Azerbaijan westward through the Caucasus, and both pass near the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh enclave. Let me show you the pipelines. So see, this is basically the Armenian region, Azerbaijan. This is where the Karabakh region is, and these are the important pipelines. See, one is coming from the Caspian Sea, the other is coming from the Black Sea, and it is transporting fuel, gas and oil to basically Europe, right? And Europe deems this pipeline very important because it wants to decrease its dependence on Russian oil and gas. So this is very, very important for Europe. So that is why bigger stakes. So if this region is disturbed, then the security of these gas pipelines would also be disturbed, and this could disturb the energy security and balance in Europe. I also discussed in previous videos that how Europe is increasingly dependent on oil and gas, and it has abandoned coal because it wants to become carbon neutral and more green on paper. So they are using more and more of oil and gas. Now Russia is a superpower in oil and gas, but they don't want because of geopolitical tensions. So they are dependent on these sources and they are under threat. Now getting back to the article, you can basically take a screenshot. Now let's get back to the article. Any widening conflict could endanger both of them and Europe's hope of tapping the Caspian region to reduce its dependence upon Russian energy sources. At the same time, any escalating conflicts could draw neighboring powers thanks to Armenia's military pact with Russia. I've already told you all of this in the introduction. And Azerbaijan's pact with Turkey. Plus, there is Pakistan, which is coming from Azerbaijan side because now they are remembering Ummah. They don't remember Ummah when it's about the Uyghurs of Xinjiang, but here they are remembering it. I'm going to tell you that in near future, Pakistan would be begging money from Turkey as well. Not that they don't already, but they would be more and more dependent on Turkey because under their current foreign minister, they have basically upset the Saudis and Saudis are not giving them any credence right now. So their only source would be now Turkey and China. So even China has its limits, though China is literally and virtually buying out whole of Pakistan, but still they are very greedy people. So now they will be dependent on Turkey. And if this struggle becomes something big, it will be a bounty for Pakistan because then again, in the name of Islam, it can open its terror factory and now it can focus on Azerbaijan as well, right? Azerbaijan-Armenia conflict. So it's all business and Pakistani army is the most discredited and it is basically a mercenary army. Now getting back to it, that could lead to a showdown between Moscow and Ankara, which are already at odds over Russia's intervention in Syria and Turkey shooting down of a Russian warplane in November. And I've also told you how Mr. Erdogan is trying to be the new de facto leader of Sunni Islam. So that is why he is trying to project a strongman image. He's converting museums into mosques in his country. Now he's getting involved here. And he always makes a statement about Kashmir. Even at the UNGA virtual summit, he made a statement about Kashmir. He does not pay any attention what these people are doing in the name of Islam to minorities. As a matter of fact, they are not even closer to Islam because like I told you that Turkey has signed an extradition deal with China under which they are basically extraditing the Uyghur Muslims back to China. So there they don't remember anything about Islam. It is only where they can basically show off, then they try to be this macho people. But if really a confrontation happens, then again Turkey like Pakistan would be brown faced. They are basically picking up on smaller powers. Now Turkey knows it is far away from India. That is why it can make statements. Had Turkey been sharing a border with India, it wouldn't be making these statements. And it is also messing with Russia. So Turkey, again, China, Turkey, all these countries are going crazy these days. Now what is Caucasus? The region of Caucasus represent a portion of territory between Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. See, and both of them are rich in resources. And this is Caucasus. And these are the Caucasus mountains, the Great Caucasus and the Lesser Caucasus. And they are basically acting as border between the Eastern Europe and Western Europe, right? So this is the Caucasus region. See this south of Russian region, then countries Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Black Sea and Caspian Sea, right? So it is mainly occupied by Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia and southwest Russia. It is home to Caucasus Mountains, including the Greater Caucasus Mountain. This is the Greater Caucasus Mountain, which has historically been considered as a natural barrier between Eastern Europe and Western Europe. So these are the Caucasus Mountains. This is also important for your geography. So Caucasus Mountains, Greater, Lesser, Georgia, Azerbaijan. So Azerbaijan is between these two Caucasus Mountain ranges, right? This is Black Sea, this is Caspian Sea. So this is the Caucasus region, and the pipelines from both the region, they travel from here to west Europe. So this region is very, very important. Now about the clashes. Both sides which fought a war in 1990s reported fatalities. The present conflict is a new flare-up of decades-old conflict between majority Christian Armenia and mainly Muslim Azerbaijan. Armenia said Azerbaijan had carried out an air and artillery attack on Nagorno-Karabakh. Azerbaijan accused Armenian forces of launching deliberate and targeted attacks along the front line. So Armenia is saying that Azerbaijan attacked and Azerbaijan is saying that Armenia attacked. Now whosoever may have attacked first, but this could snowball into some regional tension. As it is, we are living in 2020, so anything is possible. So let's see what happens in this. Climate change and forest fire. Now this topic is very, very important for those who are preparing for UPSC, especially for their mains examination. Now forest fires have been hot topic for the past 3-4 years, and more so in the last 2 years. We have seen how the Amazons have been burning, right? And I also told you in a previous video, the largest tropical wetland, the Pantanal, which is also in Brazil, that is also burning, right? So we'll see what are the factors due to climate change that are leading to more forest fires. Then we will see what are the types or kinds of forest fires, which one is the most destructive, right? And then we'll see what is India's whole program and action plan to tackle forest fires. So in this topic, we'll be learning a lot of things. So let's get started. Now, scientists have noted that human-induced climate change promotes the conditions on which wildfires depend. Now, what could those conditions be? Number one, we know because of climate change, heat waves, extreme heat waves, right? So those heat waves, they basically lead to more dry mass in the forest area, right? So this dry mass is more susceptible to catching fire. Now add to that human intervention in forests. Most of the forest fires, including in India, are because of human reasons. Humans go to forests, then they burn fires, then they forget to put out fires and the whole forest burns. So we'll also see how many forest fires take place in India, how many are human induced, all that. But number one, what climate change does, because of heat waves or the rising temperature, there is more readily available biomass which can be burnt, right? Then there are high wind speeds in heat wave conditions. Now these winds, what they do, they basically help in spreading the fire, right? And low humidity conditions or low moisture conditions, again the ideal conditions for spreading of fire. So this all has been exaggerated or exacerbated because of climate change. Now first of all, what is forest fire? Also called wild bush or vegetation fire, it can be described as any uncontrolled and non-prescribed combustion or burning of plants in a natural setting, such as a forest, grassland, brushland or tundra, which consumes the natural fuels and spreads based on environmental conditions, example wind and topography. What is the fuel here? Basically the dry biomass. And if you remember, recently there were also forest fires in Australia. So forest fires are very, very important topic for your examination. Please keep that in mind, okay? Now wildfires can be incited by human actions such as land clearing, extreme drought, or in rare cases by lightning. But lightning is very rare. Majorly it is human induced actions. For example, in Brazil. What is happening in Brazil? Under President Jair Bolsonaro, they have been clearing large patches of the Amazon forests, and the cheapest and the quickest way to do that is to burn those forests. So they try to burn a patch, but the fire becomes uncontrollable and then it burns a very, very large part. Now there are 3 conditions that need to be presented in order for a wildfire to burn: fuel, oxygen and a heat source. So fuel is there, the dry biomass. Oxygen is present because so many trees are there in forest, and a heat source. Now it could be lightning or by human actions. Now what is the role of human induced climate change? Increases in greenhouse gases resulting from human activities have led to a net effect of warming of climate systems, leading to direct impacts including increased air and ocean temperatures, widespread melting of snow and ice, and rising global average sea level. So these are the reasons that we know, but how are they connected to forest fires? Let us see. So these are the factors that basically are induced due to climate change. Climate change increases the frequency and severity of fire weather around the world. So fire weather means that there should be high temperature, low relative humidity and strong sustained winds having a speed more than 20 miles per hour, carrying oxygen, and they spread flames. So these are the fire weather conditions which are excavated or increased in frequency and intensity or severity because of climate change. Increased fire weather from climate change amplifies fire risk where fuels remain available. Fire weather is a combination of conditions that set the stage for rapid spread of wildfires. I've already told you: high temperature, low relative humidity, and strong sustained winds which carry oxygen and spread the flames. Poor land and forest management also contributes to wildfires. However, it does not alone account for the recent increases in the extent and severity of wildfires globally. So the recent severity and the extent is a complex mixture of human induced and natural phenomena. Now human induced factors are what? One is direct and other is indirect. Direct is what? Like in Brazil, they burn the forest, a patch, and then that fire becomes uncontrollable. Or humans go to wild areas or forests and they set camps and they forget to put out fires, and those fires basically spread out. Or it could be a simple act of arson as well, right? And indirect is the climate change which is increasing the severity of fire weather across the world. Now the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it has also come up with some factors that have led to increase in forest fires. So let us see. So the factors identified by IPCC, the fifth assessment report of IPCC published in 2013, identified a few factors that could influence the way wildfires play out. These include global increase in average temperatures, global increase in the frequency, intensity, and extent of heat waves, and regional increases in frequency, duration, and intensity of droughts. Again, these are all interconnected and intertwined. Now, what is the forest fire management architecture in India? Now, before we get to that, first let us see what are the kinds of forest fires. So basically there are three types of forest fires. One is crown fires, which basically spreads from the canopy to canopy, and this is the most dangerous kind of fire. I'll just show you the diagram as well. This is the most dangerous kind of fire and it is very difficult to control. The second is surface fire or ladder fire. What happens that the trunk catches fire and the fire slowly goes up to the canopy. So this can be controlled if it is detected in time. And the last is the ground fire. Now this is a hidden fire kind of thing, because what happens, either it is very spontaneous, on the surface there are many leaves and bushes and they catch fire very easily and rapidly, and sometimes what happens that there is humus or biomass present in the soil layers, right, or beneath the leaves. Now they can actually accumulate heat for a very long time, so much so that it could happen that during the winter they are accumulating the heat, and then that heat converts into fires during spring or summer. So these are also dangerous, and sometimes these are called invisible fires, and they become very relevant in case of Pantanal. If you remember when I told you about Pantanal fires, the largest tropical wetlands which are also engulfed in fires, so they are basically suffering from this ground fires, right? Because it was not detected in time, because it was brewing in the biomass and then it suddenly started. So let us see just what this is saying. Crown fires, it burns trees up their entire length at the top. These are the most intense and dangerous forest fires. I'll just show you the diagram, just wait. Surface fires and ladder fires or ladder fires, they burn only surface litter and duff. They are the easiest fires to put out and cause the least damage to the forest. Then are ground fires, sometimes called underground or subsurface fires. They occur in deep accumulation of humus, peat and similar dead vegetation that become dry enough to burn. So see, they have a high carbon content, so they can be burned, and ultimately these are the things that would be converted to coal over a period of millions of years. So they have the potential, right? So these basically If they are dry enough, then they can accumulate the heat and they can also burn. These fires move very slowly but can become difficult to fully put out or suppress. So these are like burning coal. You see, when you burn coal, then it simmers. It is something like that. Occasionally, especially during prolonged drought, such fires can smolder all winter underground and then emerge at the surface again in the spring. So this one is called the invisible fire or the hidden fire, and the Pantanal are burning because of this ground fires. So as I said, these are the diagrams of forest fires. So this is what the tree crown or crown fire looks like. See, now this is very easy to spread from canopy to canopy, then canopy to canopy. So this spreads most rapidly. Then the second is the ladder. It basically climbs up. Now there is a distance between these trees. So it takes more time to basically spread and it can be easily put out. And the last one is the surface, which can happen at the bushes level or also the underground level. So you can take a screenshot and you can read this later on, whatever this is saying, because I have already explained what these three types basically mean. Now getting back to forest fire management in India. So basically a joint study report of Ministry of Environment and Forests and World Bank titled Strengthening Forest Fire Management in India was released in June 2018. Now it revealed something very startling, that in the year 2000, 20 districts representing 3% of India's land area and 16% of forest cover accounted for 44% of all fire detections. So only 20 districts, only 3% of India's land area and only 16% of forest cover, but 44% of fire detections. And these areas were basically concentrated in central India and the northeastern region. Over 30,000 forest fires were reported in India in 2019, and around 95% of forest fires in India are on account of human activity. So like I told you in the introduction, that the majority or almost all the fires, forest fires in India, they are happening because of human activity. So to tackle this, India has come up with its plans. For example, the upgraded version of fire alert system FAST 3 was released in January 2019 with a separate activity of monitoring large forest areas. So this is basically a method of monitoring forest fires, and then it will sound an alarm. This is called what? FAST, and the latest version is FAST 3.0. Now we have also managed to map the fire vulnerability or the fire occurrences that happen. So based on that, we have made classifications. So let us see what those classifications are. Forest cover of states and UTs under different fire prone classes. Now the first is extreme fire prone, and basically it covers Mizoram and Tripura. Like I said, majority of fires we would find in northeastern states and central India. Then very highly fire prone are Mizoram and Manipur. Then highly fire prone Nagaland and Manipur. Moderately fire prone Punjab and Nagaland. See, this is a map. You can take a screenshot, right? We have just classified them: extremely fire prone, highly fire prone, moderately fire prone, and less fire prone. The forests in northeastern and central parts of India have more fire prone areas in country. Close to 30% forest cover in Mizoram are under extremely fire prone category, highest in the country. So maximum or the highest is in Mizoram. Map shows India's fire prone area. So these are basically the fire prone areas, central India and northeastern states, and maximum in Mizoram. Now what are India's initiative to tackle forest fires? We have a National Action Plan on Forest Fires 2018. The Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change came up with a National Action Plan on Forest Fires 2018 to revamp forest fire management in the country. Basically, we just learnt about FAST 3.0, which will sound the alert of forest fire. So that is also part of management of forest fires. The objectives were informing, enabling and empowering forest fringe communities and incentivizing them to work in tandem with state forest departments, because these are the communities that are nearest to the forest. They can take the fastest possible action, and they would also be the ones who would be most affected by forest fires. So it is very, very important, and at times they could be the reasons for forest fires as well. So it is very, very important that we include these communities in forest management plans. The plan proposes 9 strategies to address the issue, including establishment of a center of excellence on forest fire management at Forest Survey of India. Now, this is not important. You don't need to know the 9 strategies. You just need to know the name of the plan. Then Forest Fire Prevention and Management Scheme. The Forest Fire Prevention and Management Scheme is the only centrally funded program specifically dedicated to assist the states in dealing with forest fires. So this is a centrally funded program. That means it would be on a platform that would be shared between center and state. There is another scheme called Central Scheme, which is basically 100% central funding, but this is centrally funded program. The FPM replaced the Intensification of Forest Management Scheme in 2017. Funds allocated under the FPM are according to the center-state cost-sharing formula, with a 90:10 ratio of central to state funding in northeastern and western Himalayan regions and 60:40 ratio for all other states. So this is the basic standard formula that we have for sharing. So the same is here as well. It also provides the states the flexibility to direct a portion of National Afforestation Program and Mission for Green India funding towards the forest fire work. So this is the entire framework or the policy initiative or the management program that we have with regard to forest fires in India. We also learned how climate change is leading to more forest fires because it is leading to more forest weather conditions, more severity and more frequency. What is forest weather condition? Low humidity, high speed winds greater than 20 mile per hour, yes, and high availability of dry biomass, right? So these all conditions are there because of the climate change, and because of climate change there is also greater droughts. Again, these greater droughts produce the fuel, that is the biomass, which can be burned, right? And then we saw the 3 types of forest fires. One is canopy, the second is ladder, and the third is surface. This is the most dangerous. This is least dangerous and easy to control. This is also very, very dangerous. It can happen on the surface in the cases of bushes and leaves, and also subsurface where the biomass like humus, peat could be simmering for a very long time, especially in case of a drought where it could be simmering or smoldering throughout the winter and then convert into a fire in the spring. And this invisible fire is basically haunting the Pantanal wetland in Brazil, right? So we have covered everything regarding forest fires. This is a very, very important, and I hope you make your appropriate notes so that your topic is covered. Sandalwood spike disease. So this is basically a disease that ails the sandalwood trees in India. It was first discovered in 1899, right? And this occurs almost yearly, and 1 to 5% or 1 to 3% of sandalwood trees are lost every year because of this disease. Now, this disease has been detected in Kerala and Karnataka, prominently in these areas. So we will see what this disease is, right? How it occurs, why is it called invisible killer, how to cure it, and what the government of India is doing to solve this problem. So let us see. The dreaded disease has resurfaced, seriously infecting natural habitats in Karnataka and Kerala. According to a study, the natural population of sandalwood in Marayur in Kerala and various reserve forests in Karnataka, including Hills, are heavily infected with SSD. Now, what is sandalwood spike disease? It is a major disease of sandalwood caused by Phytoplasma, bacterial parasites of plant tissues. So what is the cause? Phytoplasma, which are bacterial parasites of plant tissues and which are transmitted by insect vectors. That means insects acting as vectors or carriers of these parasites, they transfer them from tree to tree. Between 1% to 5% of sandalwood trees are lost every year due to this disease. It was first reported in Kodagu in 1899. Has been one of the major causes for the decline in sandalwood production in the country for over a century. And the study is saying that if this is not controlled immediately, then it would lead to a substantial loss, right? Now, why is it called an invisible killer? It is called an invisible killer because initially the symptoms do not show, and the symptoms begin to show only after the plant is or the tree is heavily infected. So presently it is very difficult to identify the symptoms of SSD. It can be noticed only when the trees get completely affected or infected. Now what are the reasons for present spread? They are saying because due to restrictions on green felling of trees, which has allowed vectors to spread the diseases to healthy trees. Now green felling means that you cut mature trees which are green and they are not dying. So basically there was a restriction on cutting of forests, and because of the wide availability of trees in forests, these vectors, they travel swiftly between trees and they spread the disease. Now that is causing deaths in these healthy trees. What is the cure? As of now, no cure exists. Only option is to cut down and remove the infected tree to prevent the spread of the disease. Now what is the government doing? The government under the Union Ministry of Ayush is basically providing financial allocation of rupees 50 lakh for a 3-year study to combat the killer disease. And that study would be conducted by the Institute of Wood Science and Technology, Bangalore, and it will be joining hands with Pune-based National Center for Cell Sciences, right? So this is all about this news. SSD caused because of phytoplasm, invisible killer because it is not easy to detect. Why? Green felling was prohibited. That led to major density of the trees, and the vectors could basically spread rapidly through these trees and they could spread the disease, right? And as of now, no cure, only to cut down the affected or infected trees. So that is all about this article. Now let us move to the next. GYMEX 20. So this is basically a biennial naval exercise between the navies of India and Japan. Now what does biennial means? That every other year or once in 2 years. That means biennial, right? Now this happened in North Arabian Sea, and it was in the format at sea only and no contact in light of novel coronavirus. Now India and Japan have been increasing their maritime and naval cooperation, and recently we also signed an agreement called MDA, right? So our navies are increasingly coming closer, and these agreements are allowing us to work on each other's platforms and also to provide logistical and other support to each other's navies and armies in the time of need. And this is also very important because there is going to be Quad. I think it is going to be formalized in the Malabar exercise that is going to take place in November. The Malabar exercise basically is conducted between the navies of India, USA and Japan. Now India is going to invite Australia as well. That's what the reports are saying. So once Australia also comes, the Quad, which is the alliance of all these four, would be formalized, and the Quad is basically focused at the Indo-Pacific region, and indirectly it is aimed at containing China and Chinese ambitions. So let us see what GYMEX 20 is all about. So what is GYMEX? Biennial India and Japan Naval Exercise. GYMEX 20, it was the 4th edition of Biennial India and Japan Naval Exercise underway in the North Arabian Sea. This is the first exercise following the conclusion of Mutual Logistical Support Agreement early this month. The 3-day war games are being conducted in a non-contact at sea only format because of COVID, and mutual logistical support means that we will be providing logistical support to each other's navies and armies. I've already told you. Now, India-Japan maritime cooperation. The maritime cooperation has significantly increased between the two sides, with focus on information sharing and maritime domain awareness in the Indian Ocean region and Indo-Pacific. So again, our focus is going to be Indian Ocean region and Indo-Pacific, right? And why? Because number one, China is making incursion into Indian Ocean region, which is basically our strategic backyard. So now we are going to challenge China in what it considers its own strategic backyard, that is the South China Sea and the Pacific region. That is why we are joining hands with Pacific powers, right? So this is one of those steps that we have to take to contain China. So folks, thank you for watching. This was all about this video. I hope it was helpful for you. If you like this video, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss out on any new notifications or any new video when we post one. Also, please press the like button if you liked our video, and please do connect with us on our Instagram page, UPSC for Everyone. See you next time. Till then, stay happy, stay safe, and have a great day. Namaste and Jai Hind.